Excuse me. Who gave you permission to use my lake?
3 days before everything changed, I signed the papers for 5,000 acres of Texas land that almost nobody wanted. The realtor looked surprised when I accepted the deal because several buyers had walked away after hearing rumors about the property. Some people believed the land had legal problems, while others claimed the nearby homeowners association had scared away every serious investor. I listened carefully, but I had spent my entire life studying property records and I trusted official documents more than small-town gossip. The moment I held the keys in my hand, I felt something I had not felt in years. It was the beginning of a new chapter. The ranch stretched for miles with rolling hills, open fields, ancient oak trees, and long wooden fences that had stood for generations. An old red barn still stood proudly against the Texas sky, and although it needed repairs, I could already imagine what the place would look like after a little hard work. The previous owner had left almost everything behind, including old farm equipment, weathered signs, and stacks of forgotten paperwork inside the ranch house. I spent the rest of the afternoon walking across the property, marking damaged fences, checking water lines, and making plans for the future. Late in the evening, I climbed a small hill near the center of the ranch, and that was when I saw something that completely took my breath away. Hidden between the trees was a beautiful crystal-clear lake reflecting the orange colors of the Texas sunset. The water looked untouched and peaceful, as if it had been waiting for someone to finally appreciate it again. I smiled because I knew I had found the true treasure of the ranch. The realtor had never even mentioned the lake. The next morning I decided to explore it more closely. I loaded a small backpack, climbed into my truck, and drove toward the shoreline, expecting nothing more than a quiet morning surrounded by nature. But before I even reached the water, I noticed fresh tire tracks crossing my ranch road. A few minutes later, I heard children laughing in the distance, followed by the sound of boat paddles cutting through the water. When I finally stepped out of the truck, I stopped in complete silence. Dozens of people were swimming, fishing, kayaking, and having family picnics around my private lake as if they had owned it for years. Expensive cars filled the parking area and colorful umbrellas lined the shoreline. Nobody looked confused to see me because nobody believed they were doing anything wrong. At that moment I realized buying this ranch was never going to be as simple as I had imagined, and I still had no idea that this peaceful lake was about to become the center of the biggest legal battle of my life. I stood quietly for a few seconds watching families enjoy the lake that legally belonged to my ranch. Children were laughing while couples relaxed under expensive umbrellas and several boats drifted across the clear blue water. Nobody looked nervous because nobody believed they were trespassing. As I walked closer, a woman wearing a perfectly tailored burgundy blazer confidently stepped forward with a friendly smile. She extended her hand and introduced herself as Victoria Hayes, the president of Silver Creek Estates Homeowners Association. Before I could even introduce myself, she welcomed me to what she proudly called Silver Creek Lake. I politely smiled and asked a simple question. Where exactly is Silver Creek Lake on the county property records? Her smile faded for just a second before she confidently replied that everyone in the neighborhood had used this lake for almost 15 years. She explained that every homeowner paid monthly HOA fees for access to the lake, walking trails, picnic areas, and boat dock. She spoke with complete confidence, as if there was absolutely no doubt that everything around us belonged to the community. I calmly reached into my backpack and removed the certified property deed I had received 3 days earlier. I unfolded the survey map and showed her the official boundary lines. The lake was clearly marked inside Walker Ranch with no recorded public access and no legal easement anywhere on the document. Victoria barely looked at the papers before pushing them back toward me. She smiled again and told me that lawyers had already settled this issue years ago. According to her, the previous ranch owner had agreed to let the HOA use the lake forever, and there was nothing I could do about it. I asked if she had a signed agreement or a recorded easement filed with the county. Instead of answering directly, she told me their legal team had all the documents they needed. Around us, several homeowners quietly gathered to listen. Some nodded in agreement, while others looked uncertain for the first time. One older man admitted he had lived there for 12 years and had always believed the lake was owned by the community. A young couple standing nearby whispered that they had never actually seen any official paperwork. The atmosphere slowly changed. Questions started replacing confidence. I remained calm because arguing would solve nothing. I thanked Victoria for the conversation, folded my documents, and walked back toward my truck. As I drove away, I could see her speaking urgently with several board members while pointing in my direction. That evening, I opened every file the previous owner had left inside the ranch house. Hours passed before I discovered a faded envelope hidden inside an old metal cabinet. Across the front, someone had written only 4 words in black ink: "County records never lie." My heartbeat slowed as I carefully opened the envelope because deep inside I knew whatever was inside had been hidden for a very long time. I barely slept that night because I could not stop thinking about the envelope hidden inside the old metal cabinet. The words written across the front stayed in my mind over and over again. County records never lie. Early the next morning, I carried every document to the dining table inside the ranch house and carefully spread them across the wood. Most of the papers were faded with age, but one large folded survey immediately caught my attention. It had been prepared by a licensed Texas surveyor almost 30 years earlier. I slowly unfolded the map and compared it with the modern survey I had received at closing. Every boundary line matched perfectly. The lake was completely surrounded by Walker Ranch, and there was no recorded public access road leading to the shoreline. Even more surprising was a handwritten note attached to the original survey. It explained that several developers had once requested permanent lake access, but every request had been denied by the previous owner because he wanted to protect the ranch for future generations. I continued reading until another document slipped from inside the folder. It was a letter from a law firm dated nearly 20 years earlier. The attorney warned the previous owner that the nearby Homeowners Association had started advertising the lake as a neighborhood feature even though no legal agreement had ever been signed. The lawyer advised him to record additional notices with the county to prevent future ownership disputes. My heart raced because the warning had predicted exactly what I was now facing. Someone had ignored the truth for years and eventually the lie had become accepted as fact. I immediately drove to the county records office carrying both the original survey and the attorney's letter. The county clerk carefully examined every page before disappearing into the archive room. Nearly 20 minutes passed before she returned carrying a thick property file covered in dust. She smiled politely and placed it on the counter before saying something I will never forget. "Mr. Walker, your ranch has one of the cleanest property records we have ever seen. There has never been a recorded easement granting public access to that lake. There has never been a legal transfer of ownership, and there has never been any document giving the Homeowners Association permission to use your land." Hearing those words felt like a huge weight had been lifted from my shoulders. Before leaving, I requested certified copies of every record. As the clerk prepared the paperwork, she quietly mentioned one final detail. A few weeks before the ranch was sold, someone representing Silver Creek Estates had visited the same office asking for copies of the exact same records. They had left looking very disappointed. At that moment I realized the HOA leadership already knew the truth long before I bought the ranch. They were not mistaken. They were simply hoping the next owner would never discover what was hidden inside the county archives. As I walked back toward my truck, my phone suddenly rang. The caller identified herself as an attorney representing Silver Creek Estates and politely informed me that I would soon be receiving official legal papers. The lawsuit had already been filed. 2 days after leaving the county records office, I heard the sound of a vehicle pulling into my ranch driveway just after sunrise. A sheriff's deputy stepped out carrying a thick legal envelope. He politely confirmed my name before handing me the documents and wishing me a good day. The words printed across the front immediately caught my attention. Silver Creek Estates Homeowners Association vs. Jack Walker. I walked back inside the ranch house, placed the envelope on the kitchen table, and slowly opened it. The lawsuit claimed that I was interfering with the peaceful enjoyment of community property, and demanded that the court permanently stop me from restricting access to the lake. They even asked the judge to recognize the lake as a long-established neighborhood amenity despite the fact that every official record I had already collected proved otherwise. Instead of feeling angry, I actually smiled because I knew something they did not. Every certified county record was already sitting safely inside my office. I picked up my phone and called the one attorney I trusted more than anyone else. Rebecca Lawson answered on the second ring. After listening quietly to the entire story, she asked only one question. Did you bring certified copies from the county records office? When I told her yes, she simply replied, then we are going to be just fine. Later that afternoon, Rebecca arrived at the ranch wearing her Navy business suit, carrying 2 large legal briefcases. We spread every document across the dining table, including the original survey maps, the attorney letter from 20 years ago, the certified county records, and the closing paperwork from my purchase. Rebecca carefully reviewed every page without saying much. Nearly an hour later, she leaned back in her chair, smiled confidently, and looked directly at me. Jack, this may be one of the strongest property ownership cases I have seen in years. If these documents are authentic, the HOA has an enormous problem. She explained that the court would not care about neighborhood traditions or verbal promises. The only thing that mattered was what had actually been recorded with the county. We immediately began preparing our response to the lawsuit. Rebecca requested additional certified maps, professional land surveys, aerial photographs, historical property records, and every document connected to the ranch going back decades. Before leaving, she reminded me of one important rule. From this moment forward, do not argue with anyone from the HOA and do not discuss the case with the media. Let the evidence speak for itself. The following morning, local news trucks were already parked outside the entrance to my ranch. Reporters interviewed homeowners who confidently claimed the lake had always belonged to the community. Victoria Hayes appeared on camera describing the lawsuit as a fight to protect neighborhood traditions. I simply drove past the reporters without saying a single word because I knew the courtroom would be the only place where the truth actually mattered. That evening, Rebecca called again with new information. The judge assigned to the case was Eleanor Brooks. She was known across Texas for one thing above everything else. She ignored emotion, ignored public pressure, and based every decision entirely on evidence. The moment I heard her name, I realized the HOA's biggest advantage had just disappeared. A week after the lawsuit was filed, both sides entered the discovery phase, and that was where everything began to change. Rebecca explained that discovery was the part of a case where neither side could hide evidence from the other. Every official document, every communication, and every record connected to the dispute could be requested by the court. Within hours, she prepared a long list of requests asking the HOA to produce every property survey, every engineering report, every board meeting minute, every legal opinion, and every document related to the lake during the past 20 years. 3 days later, the HOA attorneys responded with several large digital files claiming they had provided everything relevant. Rebecca quietly smiled because she had expected exactly that response. She spent 2 full days reading every page while I organized certified county records beside her. Late on the second evening, she suddenly stopped turning pages and looked at me without saying a word. She slowly pushed one document across the table. It was the official minutes from an HOA board meeting held almost 16 years earlier. Buried deep inside the report was a single paragraph that immediately caught my attention. The board had been advised by its own attorney that the lake was privately owned and that no recorded easement existed granting permanent community access. The attorney recommended negotiating a legal agreement with the ranch owner before advertising the lake as a neighborhood feature. My hands tightened around the paper as I continued reading. The next page revealed that the proposal had been rejected because purchasing legal access would cost too much money. Instead, the board voted to continue promoting the lake while hoping future owners would never challenge their claim. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Rebecca finally broke the silence by saying these meeting minutes could completely change the case because they proved the HOA leadership had known the truth for years. This was no misunderstanding. It was a conscious decision. The following morning, Rebecca filed a motion asking the court to compel the HOA to produce every internal email related to the lake. Their attorneys immediately objected, claiming the request was too broad, but Judge Eleanor Brooks rejected the objection within hours and ordered full disclosure. 2 days later, another digital archive arrived. Thousands of emails stretched back more than a decade. Most discussed routine neighborhood business, but one conversation immediately stood out. Victoria Hayes had written to another board member several months before I purchased the ranch. Her message warned that the property was finally going on the market and that a knowledgeable buyer could create serious legal problems if they checked the county records. Another board member replied that they should continue using the lake exactly as they always had because challenging the next owner would probably be cheaper than paying for legal access. Rebecca quietly closed her laptop and looked directly at me. Jack, this changes everything. The case is no longer only about property ownership. Now it is about whether the HOA knowingly misrepresented someone else's private property for years. As the courtroom date moved closer, I realized the truth was becoming impossible for them to hide. But Victoria Hayes still believed she could convince the judge that long years of community use mattered more than written law. She was about to learn how Judge Eleanor Brooks handled cases built on assumptions instead of evidence. The morning of the first court hearing arrived with a calm Texas sunrise, but inside the county courthouse the atmosphere was anything but peaceful. Reporters had already gathered outside the entrance, and dozens of Silver Creek homeowners filled the courtroom gallery long before the hearing began. Many of them smiled confidently as they whispered among themselves, believing the judge would quickly order me to reopen the lake. I quietly took my seat beside Rebecca Lawson while she carefully arranged every certified document into neat folders. Across the courtroom, Victoria Hayes sat with three attorneys wearing the same confident expression I had seen beside the lake only weeks earlier. At exactly 9 o'clock, the courtroom doors closed and Judge Eleanor Brooks entered. Everyone immediately stood as complete silence filled the room. Judge Brooks looked across both legal teams before calmly explaining that her courtroom was not interested in opinions, traditions, or emotions. She would decide the case using only recorded facts, verified evidence, and the law. Those words immediately changed the mood inside the courtroom. Rebecca stood first and presented certified copies of the county property records, the original survey maps, and the official deed transferring ownership of the entire ranch to me. She explained that every document had been verified by the county records office and clearly showed that the lake had always remained part of Walker Ranch with no recorded easement and no transfer of ownership. Judge Brooks carefully reviewed each document without interruption before placing them beside her bench. Victoria's lead attorney then argued that the homeowners had openly used the lake for many years and believed they had permanent rights because previous owners had never objected. He described the lake as an important part of the community, and claimed that removing access would unfairly harm dozens of families. Judge Brooks listened patiently before asking one simple question that immediately changed the direction of the hearing. Can you show this court a recorded legal easement granting permanent access to the lake? The courtroom became completely silent. Victoria's attorney searched through several folders before admitting that no recorded easement existed but insisted that years of uninterrupted community use should still be considered. Judge Brooks slowly removed her glasses and looked directly toward the HOA legal team. She explained that long-term use could never replace a properly recorded property right when state law required written documentation. Several homeowners in the gallery quietly exchanged nervous looks for the first time. Rebecca then requested permission to submit the HOA board meeting minutes and internal emails discovered during the discovery process. The judge reviewed the request and approved it immediately. Victoria's expression changed as she realized those documents were about to become part of the official court record. Before the hearing ended, Judge Brooks ordered both parties to prepare for a full evidentiary trial and instructed the HOA to produce every remaining document connected to the lake, including communications with previous property owners. As everyone began leaving the courtroom, I noticed Victoria speaking urgently with her attorneys while several homeowners surrounded her asking questions she could not easily answer. Rebecca quietly gathered our files, looked at me, and smiled. Today was only the beginning, but the truth was already doing exactly what we hoped it would do. It was speaking for itself. 3 days after the first hearing, Rebecca received a phone call from a man who refused to give his full name over the phone. He only said that he had served on the Silver Creek Estates HOA board many years earlier, and that he could no longer stay silent. Rebecca arranged to meet him that same evening at a quiet coffee shop several miles outside town. I arrived a few minutes early and watched as an older man slowly walked through the front door carrying a worn leather folder. His name was Daniel Cooper. He had been one of the original board members when Silver Creek Estates was first developed almost 20 years earlier. Daniel looked exhausted, as if he had been carrying the same secret for decades. After introducing himself, he carefully placed the folder on the table and quietly apologized. He said he had always believed the truth would eventually come out, but he never expected it would take this long. Inside the folder were handwritten meeting notes, personal correspondence, and copies of letters that had never been included in the HOA records produced during discovery. Daniel explained that when the neighborhood was first built, the developers wanted permanent lake access because they believed it would increase property values. They approached the owner of Walker Ranch several times with purchase offers, but every proposal was rejected. The ranch owner had made one thing perfectly clear: the lake would never be sold, and no permanent easement would ever be granted. Daniel said that after those negotiations failed, several board members decided to market the lake anyway, hoping that future homeowners would simply assume it belonged to the community. At first they described it as a nearby recreational feature, but over the years the language slowly changed until brochures, newsletters, and real estate advertisements referred to it as a private community lake. Daniel admitted he objected during multiple meetings, warning the board that someone would eventually discover the truth. Instead of listening, the board removed him from several committees and gradually pushed him out of the organization. Rebecca quietly asked him the question that mattered most. Did Victoria Hayes know the truth? Daniel nodded without hesitation. He explained that when Victoria became HOA president, she inherited every legal file, including attorney opinions confirming that the lake belonged entirely to Walker Ranch. She had personally reviewed those documents years before I ever purchased the property. Daniel then handed Rebecca one final document. It was an internal memorandum signed by the HOA attorney advising the board to stop advertising the lake immediately because doing so could expose the association to serious legal liability. The memorandum ended with one sentence that filled the room with silence. Continued public representation of privately owned property may constitute intentional misrepresentation. Rebecca carefully placed the document inside her legal folder before thanking Daniel for his honesty. She asked if he would be willing to testify under oath in open court. Daniel looked down at his hands for a long moment before quietly saying that he had spent too many years regretting his silence, and that it was finally time to tell the truth. 2 days later, Rebecca officially listed Daniel Cooper as a witness for trial. When the HOA attorneys received the witness list, they immediately requested an emergency meeting with Judge Brooks, but their request was denied. For the first time since this case began, I saw real concern on Victoria Hayes' face because she understood exactly what Daniel's testimony could do. She knew that once the truth was spoken under oath, there would be no way to explain it away. The morning of the evidentiary hearing arrived with clear blue skies over the Texas courthouse, but everyone inside knew this would be the most important day of the entire case. Judge Eleanor Brooks had ordered an independent licensed land survey to remove every remaining question about the property boundaries. Unlike the surveys presented by either side, this one had been completed by a court-appointed surveyor with no connection to me or the homeowners association. As the hearing began, the surveyor carried a large protective case into the courtroom. Inside were certified maps, GPS measurements, aerial photographs, and detailed field reports collected during several days of work across the ranch. Every person in the courtroom watched quietly as the maps were placed on a large display board. The surveyor explained each step of the investigation. Original boundary monuments had been located and verified using historical county records. Modern GPS equipment had confirmed every survey marker with remarkable precision. Old fence lines had been compared with the original legal descriptions recorded decades earlier. Aerial photographs taken over many years showed that the shoreline had never changed enough to affect the legal boundaries. Every independent measurement reached exactly the same conclusion. The entire lake remained completely inside the legal property lines of Walker Ranch. There was no public access corridor. There was no recorded easement. There was no shared ownership. The courtroom became completely silent as the surveyor finished his presentation. Rebecca calmly stood and asked one final question. In your professional opinion, is there any legal uncertainty regarding ownership of this lake? The surveyor answered without hesitation. Absolutely none. The legal boundary is clear, and the lake is entirely contained within Walker Ranch. Victoria's attorneys immediately began questioning the surveyor, hoping to expose mistakes or inconsistencies, but every answer only strengthened the report. When asked whether years of public use could change physical property boundaries, the surveyor calmly explained that surveying measures land, not assumptions. Property ownership is determined by legal records, not by how many people believe something to be true. Several homeowners lowered their heads as those words echoed through the courtroom. Many of them realized for the first time that they had trusted promises instead of facts. Judge Brooks carefully reviewed the complete survey before thanking the expert for his testimony. She then turned toward the HOA legal team and asked if they had any professional survey contradicting the court-appointed report. After a long pause, their lead attorney quietly admitted that they did not. The judge nodded slowly and made several notes, before announcing that the evidentiary portion of the trial was now complete. Final arguments would be heard the following morning. As everyone stood to leave, Daniel Cooper quietly walked over to me. He looked toward the courtroom door before saying something I will always remember. Truth can take years to arrive, but once it walks into a courtroom, it never leaves alone. I thanked him for having the courage to speak when it mattered most. As I walked outside, dozens of reporters surrounded the courthouse steps waiting for comments. I simply smiled politely and kept walking because I knew the only opinion that mattered would come from Judge Eleanor Brooks tomorrow morning. The courtroom was completely silent as Judge Eleanor Brooks entered and took her seat behind the bench. Nobody whispered. Nobody moved. Even the reporters stopped typing for a moment because everyone understood that months of arguments, documents, surveys, and testimony had all led to this single morning. Judge Brooks looked across the courtroom before opening a thick folder containing her written decision. She began by thanking both legal teams for their professionalism before explaining that property disputes are not decided by popularity, tradition, or public opinion. They are decided by law supported by verified evidence. She carefully reviewed the timeline of the case, beginning with the original ownership of Walker Ranch nearly 30 years earlier. She explained that every certified county record, every licensed survey, every historical property description, and every independent expert had reached the same conclusion. The crystal clear lake had always remained entirely inside the legal boundaries of Walker Ranch. No recorded easement had ever been granted. No ownership interest had ever been transferred. No legal agreement had ever given Silver Creek Estates permanent access to the property. Judge Brooks then turned to the evidence produced during discovery. She described the HOA board meeting minutes, the attorney memorandum, and the internal emails as deeply concerning because they demonstrated that members of the HOA leadership had been warned repeatedly that the lake was privately owned. Instead of correcting the mistake, the board continued advertising the lake as a community amenity for years while allowing homeowners and prospective buyers to believe something that was not supported by law. The judge explained that the court could not ignore evidence showing that accurate legal advice had been received but not followed. She looked directly toward Victoria Hayes before stating that leadership carries responsibility, and that responsibility includes telling people the truth, even when the truth is inconvenient. Several homeowners quietly lowered their heads as those words echoed through the courtroom. Judge Brooks then announced the decision. The court declared that Walker Ranch remained the exclusive legal owner of the lake and all surrounding shoreline. Silver Creek Estates possessed no ownership rights, no recorded easement, and no permanent right of access. Any future entry onto the property without permission would be subject to applicable trespass laws. She permanently denied every claim made by the HOA and entered judgment in my favor. A wave of quiet emotion moved through the courtroom. Rebecca gently squeezed my arm without saying a word because she already knew what this decision meant. Months of uncertainty had finally come to an end. But Judge Brooks was not finished. She continued by addressing the conduct of the HOA leadership during the dispute. She ordered the association to correct every brochure, website advertisement, and promotional document that falsely described the lake as community property. She further ordered the HOA to notify every homeowner in writing of the court's ruling so that no future buyer would be misled. Finally, she ruled that because the HOA had pursued litigation despite possessing evidence that contradicted its claims, the association would be responsible for significant court costs, as allowed under the law. Victoria Hayes remained completely still as the ruling was read. Her attorneys quietly gathered their files without argument because there was nothing left to dispute. The evidence had spoken more clearly than any closing statement ever could. As the hearing concluded, Judge Brooks looked toward both sides one final time and said something I will never forget. Property rights exist to protect truth, not assumptions. When facts are ignored, trust eventually disappears with them. She struck the gavel once, and the case was officially over. I walked out of the courtroom into the bright Texas sunlight feeling something far more valuable than victory. I felt peace because the truth had finally been recognized exactly where it mattered most. 1 week after the court announced its decision, life at Walker Ranch finally became quiet again. For the first time since buying the property, I woke up without worrying about lawyers' court hearings or legal documents waiting at my front gate. The early Texas morning felt different. The lake reflected the rising sun exactly the way it had on the day I first discovered it. The only sounds were birds singing across the water and the gentle wind moving through the old oak trees. It finally felt like home. During the following days, I focused on restoring the ranch instead of defending it. Old fences were repaired. Walking trails were cleaned. The weathered boat dock received new wooden planks. The historic red barn was carefully restored without changing its original character. Every improvement reminded me why I had fallen in love with this property before the legal battle had ever begun. Then something unexpected happened. One afternoon, a small pickup truck slowly entered the ranch driveway. An elderly couple stepped out carrying a homemade pie. I immediately recognized them as homeowners from Silver Creek Estates. They looked nervous as they walked toward the porch. The husband quietly apologized for believing rumors instead of facts. His wife admitted they had trusted what they had been told for years and never questioned whether it was actually true. They thanked me for remaining respectful throughout the entire dispute and wished me happiness on the ranch. Before leaving, they asked if they could take one last photograph from the public road because the lake had been part of many family memories even if it had never legally belonged to the neighborhood. I smiled and told them they did not need to ask for kindness because kindness costs nothing. Over the following weeks, several more families visited simply to apologize. Some even admitted they had never supported the lawsuit but felt pressured to remain silent, while the HOA leadership spoke for everyone. I realized that not every homeowner had created the problem. Many had simply believed the people they trusted. Silver Creek Estates also began changing. New board elections were held and several long-serving leaders resigned. The community removed every advertisement claiming ownership of the lake and corrected years of inaccurate information. Little by little, trust slowly returned. As for Victoria Hayes, I never saw her again after the final hearing. People later told me she quietly moved away only a few months after the lawsuit ended. Whether those stories were true or not no longer mattered to me because I had already received everything I wanted. I never bought the ranch to win a legal battle. I bought it because I believed it could become a peaceful place where honesty mattered more than appearances. Looking back, I realized the most valuable thing I gained was not the court victory. It was the reminder that truth does not become weaker simply because it is ignored. Real ownership is protected by facts. Real integrity is measured by actions. And real justice may take time, but when it finally arrives, it speaks with a voice that no lie can silence. Every evening I still walk down to the lake just before sunset carrying a cup of coffee and watching the golden light reflect across the water. The same lake that once divided an entire neighborhood now reminds me every single day that patience, preparation, and truth will always stand stronger than arrogance and assumptions. If this story taught you anything, remember one simple lesson. Always verify the facts before believing the loudest voice in the room, because one document can change everything. Thank you for spending your time with me today. If you enjoyed this story, please support the channel by liking this video, subscribing to HOA Reality 365, and turning on notifications so you never miss another real property drama. And before you go, I would love to know one thing. Where are you watching from today? Tell me in the comments because I read every single one. Until next time, stay safe, stand for the truth, and I will see you in the next story.